Good morning. If you could remain standing for the reading of Scripture. My name is Cassie, and I'm going to be reading from John 2 today, 1 through 12. On the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars for Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." And they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw out some and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water, it had now become wine, and he did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn it knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and when the people have drunk freely, then the poor wine. But you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of his signs, Jesus did in Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. After this, he went down to Capernaum with his mother and brothers and disciples, and he stayed there for a few days. Thank you.
Thank you, Cassie. Good morning, everybody. You can be seated. My name is Drew. I am one of the pastors here alongside Hunter. Thank you to the worship team for leading this morning. All right, so as Cassie said, we are going to be in John chapter 2. So we're making our way through here. If you have a Bible, you can turn there, John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. If you do not have a Bible, we have one available for you at the end of the aisle. If you don't own a Bible, that one is our gift to you. So John chapter 2, verses 1 through 12. All right, so we've made our way through the first chapter of the book of John, which he opened up with what is somewhat of like a thesis statement in the first 18 verses. And then you see him calling the disciples. And now we go into what some scholars would call the book of signs. So the second half of the book of John is called the book of glory. The first half is called book of signs. There's 7 major signs. And so first we need to establish just what is a sign. One of the things that I've been trying to do as a parent is as you have like kids in the city, is you try to help them learn how to navigate the city. And so I had a daddy-daughter date recently with my oldest, Annabeth, and we made our way, we got on the L and we made our way down towards the Book Trader. I don't know if you've ever been there, but it's this bookstore down in Old City that is just head to toe covered in books. It's a lot of fun. You should try it. But I told her as we started, I said, "Hey, I'll go wherever you lead. You can ask me questions, but I'm not going to tell you where to go." And she was like, "Dad, I have no idea how to get there. Like, so I told her what stop we had to be at. And I said, "We're going to have to look at the signs." And she was like, all right. We eventually made our way there. But we use signs almost like subconsciously for specifically directions as you hop on I-95. You're using signs even without even knowing it. We use signs for marketing. As you're driving through I-95, there's a ridiculous amount. You know that I Hate Steven Singer is a thing because signs are all over the place. We use signs. Even, one of the things that I'm surprised at is like, since moving to Fishtown, realizing that even in like a digital age with like marketing and all of that people spend on just online marketing, that one of the most effective ways to reach your community here is to print out a sign and cover your nearest telephone pole from head to toe. And it just works. There's still something about just like a physical sign that we respond to these things. So in the simplest form, if you look at Webster, a sign is a display or symbol used to give information or direction. A display or symbol that's used to give information or direction. I think that's a fair and effective definition. Then again, we use signs sometimes in a more broadly, you are? Okay. When my wife's standing there looking at me, it makes me nervous because I'm like, anyone else can do that, but when Megan, I'm just like, is everything okay? So we use signs in a more broad terms, or we'll say things like, if we're looking for a job, we'll be like, man, I just need what? We need a sign, right? There's something in us that wants. Maybe we wouldn't say a physical sign. You're not looking for a billboard. Maybe you are, and if you are, good luck. But maybe you're looking for something that is in the physical world that reveals some sort of spiritual greater truth that's underlying all things. And so there's this sense of like, I want a sign. John, when he's defining sign, this is how he uses it towards the end. John chapter 20, verses 30 through 31. He says, "Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these are written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name." So what is he saying a sign is? For John, a signs are physical actions of Jesus that reveal spiritual truths about Jesus and the kingdom that he is bringing. So John says that signs are physical actions of Jesus that reveal spiritual truths about Jesus and the kingdom that he is bringing. So if you remember, we're talking to two different audiences. So he's speaking to Jewish people and he's speaking to Greek people. For Jewish people, they refer to a sign. If they were to talk about a sign to one another, they would be talking about God acting in history to reveal himself. So that is God putting a bow in the sky for Noah after he makes a covenant to remind him of their faithfulness. That's God with Moses going to Exodus and giving Pharaoh signs to display his power. That's Israel fleeing from Egypt and God parting the Red Sea to show them and give them a sign that he has complete control over creation and he's providing for them. These are real moments that are grounded in real history that reveal spiritual truths about God's character. So that's how, if you are Jewish audience, that's what you're thinking when you hear this word sign. If you are a more analytical and philosophical Greek audience, you are defining sign as something that's observable that allows the mind to infer an unseen reality. So one of the ways that we see this is we'll say things like, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? I forget where it was. It was like a year or so ago. There was like a ton of fire coming out of Northeast Philly. And it was like, I guess it was a bunch of tires that got lit on fire. And you're like, what? Only in our city. There's like, so you see in the distance, you're like, I see smoke, and you don't see the fire, but there's something in you that you receive that as a sign that there likely is a greater truth that you do not see, that there is fire. My son the other day was showing me his scars. He says his cool scars. He's got a scar on his finger. I didn't see the injury, but because there's a scar, there's some sort of sign or evidence that there was something that took place. He made it sound probably a lot more dramatic than it actually was. The Apostle John, what he's doing here is he's kind of like melding these two perspectives together. He's understanding that he's speaking to Jewish and to Greek people, and he's presenting Jesus as the ultimate sign, meaning that he is God acting in real time with real power and undisputable action. These actions are meant to reveal who he is and point them as an audience and us as the reader to greater unseen spiritual truths. So we're displaying who Jesus is in real action, real power. And as we see that, that is meant specifically for the Greek audience. They're looking at this saying, if that is true, there is a greater unrealized reality that Jesus is speaking of, that he is ultimately pointing us towards. These signs are meant to point us to who he is and what he's bringing. So the seven major signs. So it's going to be chapter 2 through chapter 11. If we're to let's just do a quick overview. We're not meant to surprise anybody. So these are the signs that we're going to see. John 2, we're going to see Jesus turning water into wine. That's today. Then we'll see the healing of the official's son in John 4, healing the paralytic at Bethesda in John 5, feeding the 5,000 in John 6, walking on water, also John 6, healing the man born blind, John 9, and then kind of like all of this culminating in those seven signs to the raising of Lazarus in John 11. Ultimately, all of these are pointing towards the death and the resurrection of Jesus, which is the greatest sign. So now that we know what signs are, let's pray. Father, thank you. Lord, thank you that you have sent us a sign, that you are a God that wants to be known. It's so clear in Scripture and in creation that you are moving towards us in revealing yourself. Lord, I pray that now, Lord, may you make yourself known through the power of your Spirit. Lord, may you speak clearly to us. If there's anything that's in your heart right now that needs confession, I encourage you to bring it to the Lord. If there's anything in your heart right now that brings about celebration, there's gratitude that comes from understanding who God is and how he's providing for you and making himself known, I would encourage you to bring that also to him. If he's bringing any one person in particular to pray over, I would encourage you to take a moment and to pray on behalf of that person. And finally, if there's anything that feels like it is a hindrance, something that is just a burden that you brought into this space, I would encourage you to bring that to the Lord and set it aside so that you can see clearly who he is now. Father, I pray that you would help us to respond faithfully to this sign in Jesus Christ and who he is. In your name, amen. All right, let's read our passage. We'll just start it. So, John chapter 2, verse 1 says, on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana in Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus also was invited to the wedding with his disciples. When the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does this have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servant, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. And he said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast." So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine, he did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first. And when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine, but you have kept the good wine until now." This, the first of the signs Jesus did in Cana in Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. All right, so we have gone from, again, John's massive statement. If you want to just re-listen to that, it's on Spotify, or Caleb's recorded that. John's massive statement in John chapter 1, verses 1 through 18. And then we talked about Jesus calling his disciples. And the first that comes right before this in John chapter 1, verse 51, Jesus had this interaction with Nathanael, if you remember that. He had an interaction with Nathanael, and he told him that he saw him under the fig tree, and Nathanael's amazed by that. And then Jesus kind of responds to that with this statement where he says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, you will see heaven opened and the angels of God ascending and descending on the Son of Man." What an incredible statement. For us, it may come out of left field, but what he's pointing to is the vision that Jacob had, that the gates of heaven opened up. And he's saying to Nathanael, what I've come to do is open up the gates of heaven and to provide a means by which people will come to know the Lord. So he's saying the promises that were given to Jacob are going to be revealed and seen in me. That ladder is me. I am the one. It's this beautiful truth of what Jesus is promising that he's coming to do. And then we kind of get this like hard cut. And it's like, all right, Jesus now, wedding. It says that he is at a wedding in Cana, which would have been close to Nazareth, towards Galilee, and we don't get a whole lot about this wedding. We don't know how much. We don't know much about the wedding other than we don't know whose wedding it was. We don't know how Jesus and his disciples knew the bridegroom or the groom. And then we don't know Mary's role specifically in the wedding. We can infer some things. And we don't know how long the wedding was. We don't even know why the wine ran out. So you don't really know a whole lot about the wedding. But then it says this, it says, when the wine ran out, the mother of Jesus says to him, "They have no more wine." I feel that statement. I grew up in a family of 4 boys. Right? And so you would think that with a family of 4 boys and a Mexican mother, you would run out of food at some point because we eat a lot, but you don't. because she cooks for the masses. And so I like that. That was something that would have been urgent in our home. Like if we had thrown a party and there was like the food ran out, the drink ran out, that just didn't happen. I remember going to the freezer in the garage, and she would have it just like from like the top to the bottom, stacked full of like bean and cheese tortillas, just in case, frozen, because you just don't run out of food. There's something about hospitality that it's just like innate to the way that you throw a party. And so for them, I think in this culture, it would have been very similar, that you don't run out of food. But for that culture, wine was not just something that represented just a good time. For that culture, wine was something that represented like life itself. It represented the joy and the life of the party. And so when the wine runs out, it's not just a moment where there's disappointment. When the wine runs out, it's really a moment of shame. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but it's a moment of shame specifically for the groom. This is something that could impact their marriage. And so for us, we think of the food ran out a little bit, but no, this is something that was very urgent, and you can feel that in Mary's voice. So she comes in, she says the wine has run out. Why does she go to Jesus? Because this is still the beginning of the story. And she, more than anyone else, knows who Jesus is. And the reason she does is because an angel came to her and said that you were going to have a child, and his name is going to be Emmanuel, which is God with us. And so she has been trying to process just exactly who is this Jesus along with these disciples. And so in an urgent moment, she also goes to Jesus and she informs him of the problem. And Jesus responds with, "Woman, what does this have to do with me?" I'm going to be honest, that feels, the way that it reads, slightly harsh. So if I were to address, Megan can tell you, if I were to address Megan as woman later today, that would not go well for me. I think our translation fails us a little bit here. This is actually the same term that Jesus uses in addressing the Samaritan woman in John 4. It's the same term he uses in addressing the woman caught in adultery, which he displays tremendous love towards in John 8. This is the same term that he uses for Mary Magdalene in John chapter 20. But probably the best way to see that the translation, we lose it a little bit here, is that this is actually the same term that he used when he addresses his mom again from the cross. So in John chapter 19, verse 26, when Jesus is on the cross, it says, when Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, behold your son." And he said to his disciples, "Behold your mother." His disciple, "Behold your mother." And from that hour, the disciple took her to his own home. So it is not a derogatory term, but in that culture would have been something that, I don't know that you would call it endearing, but it was something that would have been acceptable for what he was trying to communicate. And the next thing that he says is, what does this have to do with me? Some scholars would have interpreted that to say, yes, mother, what would you have me do? I think I have a hard time with that because if we're clear about what's happening here, John is going to state at the end of this chapter that this is the first of his signs, and Jesus did at Cana in Galilee, and it manifested his glory. And so if this is just Jesus submitting to the will of his mother, then I have a hard time receiving that the very first of his signs would be one that would be done under the pressure of his mother, even though he loves her. Jesus is explicit about his role. Jesus responds only to the will of the Father. So in John chapter 5, verse 30, he says, "I can do nothing on my own. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not my own will, but the will of him who sent me." John chapter 8, we're going to see him say, "And he who sent me is with me. He has not left me alone, for I always do the things that are pleasing to him." So from beginning to end, Jesus, whether it's through Peter, whether it's through his mother, is never going to be pressured into doing anything. And yet we have this response. The clearest, simplest probably translation for it is, instead of what does this have to do with me, is what do you and I have in common? It doesn't translate very well. What do you and I have in common? Or even a more direct way to say it is, you have no claims on me. And so I think what you're seeing is that Jesus, while honoring his mother and the role that she has, also distinguishing graciously and creating some sort of distance, that she is stepping into a role that is not rightfully hers. She doesn't know what she's asking. Another way is to say that. Because what she's thinking is the current moment. There's no wine. And if there's no wine, that is going to impact this family in a significant way. What Jesus is thinking is, I've come to manifest the glory of God. And if I don't do that under the will of the Father, then that is not going to impact all families for eternity the way that it should. There is something greater and a different perspective that he holds. We see this through the thing that he says next, which is, my hour has not yet come. So his hour, we're going to follow this as we go through all of these signs. His hour is Jesus's way of saying, I'm waiting for the specific moments that God has called me to these specific tasks because I'm submitting to God's, the Father's will. So we see it in John chapter 7, and it almost feels like there's this shift that happens in chapter 12. But before that, in John chapter 7, he repeats, he says, so they were seeking to arrest him, but no one laid hands on him because his hour had not yet come. John chapter 8. These words he spoke in the treasury as he taught in the temple, but no one arrested him because his hour had not yet come. But then you get to John chapter 12 and something shifts. It says, and Jesus answered them, the hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Truly, truly, I say to you, unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. So from that point forward, from chapter 12 forward, Jesus is moving towards that moment. He's moving towards that hour in a very public way. And he's communicating that to his disciples and to all of the crowd that he's teaching. But in this moment, it remains private. And that's part of God's will and intention with the life of Jesus. So Jesus gets to this place where he's now put in a position where he is... He knows the needs of the moment, and he also knows the will of the Father. And through that, the Lord allows him to continue into what would have been his first miracle. Let's keep reading. It says, his mother said to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Now there were 6 stone water jars there for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servant, fill the jars with water, and they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, now draw some out and take it to the master of the feast. So they took it. When the master of the feast tasted the water now become wine and did not know where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. All right, so first point. I promise them that I understand that I took a while to get there. We only have 2 points. So first point is that Jesus is our new and greater purification. Jesus is our new and greater purification. So John gets very specific here. So do you notice what he says? He says, go and grab these 6 jars. So 6 jars, these jars are meant to be filled. There's 20 to 30 gallons of water. So 20 to 30 gallons in a jar. I actually explored this recently because I planted a tree, an apple tree, and I needed a big enough pot. It was a dwarf apple tree. I needed a big enough pot to be able to hold it. So if you come to my house, you can see how big of a jar this is, but I couldn't bring that. What they would have is these 6 really just massive jars. That would hold 2 to 3, and they're made of stone. The reason they're made of stone, because clay was seen as something that was porous, and so it wasn't pure the same way. Stone was not something that would absorb, and so for that reason, they would have these massive stone jars, and it says specifically that they were for the rites of purification. So purification is something that you're going to see outlined in Numbers and Leviticus, and what it is it's part of the 613 laws that God gives throughout the Old Testament, and there's a portion that just talks about just cleanliness, and that's physical cleanliness. I'm talking to Annabeth about it today. Part of this is hygiene. It's good to wash your hands, and we continue to encourage you to wash your hands before you eat. But there's a bigger thing happening here where they saw this as something that was represented spiritual cleansing. And so, as you would come into a wedding, the Pharisees would dip their hands and they would begin to wash to represent the fact that they needed spiritual cleaning. And now Jesus is taking these jars, which don't hold wine, they hold water, and he's bringing them and he's putting them now in front of his disciples as they sit there, and they know what these jars are because they've stared at them ever since they've been children. And he takes them and he says, fill them to the brim. And you see in Mark chapter 7 how Pharisees would have interacted with this. In Mark 7:3, it says, for the Pharisees and all of the Jews do not eat unless they wash their hands properly, holding to the tradition of the elders. And when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they wash. So now they're at a place where they're filling these jars with water. But the cleansing was something that was only physical, although throughout the Old Testament, there is this like nod to the fact that that cleansing wasn't fully sufficient. David in Psalm 51, he says, verse 7, he says, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. Wash me, and I shall be whiter than snow. Let me hear joy and gladness. Let the bones that you have broken rejoice. Hide your face from my sins and blot out all my iniquities. And then he says, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Do you see that? Like David is connecting this idea of cleanliness is like, man, there's something deeper that God needs to do within me. The law itself was even meant to point us to that. Jesus is now taking that and he's revealing what he is doing. So can you think of another moment of where wine is significant in the scriptures? There's many. For the disciples here in Matthew chapter 26, they're going to sit at a table at some point here towards the end of Jesus' ministry. And it's going to say, and he took a cup, and when he had given thanks, he gave it to them, saying, drink of it, all of you, for this is my blood of the covenant, which is poured out for many for the forgiveness of sins. I tell you, I will not drink again of this fruit of the vine until the day when I drink it and then new with you in my Father's kingdom. So he's taking this symbol of purification and he's putting within it wine, and now he's distributing it to a wedding feast. I think what Jesus is getting at is that this new covenant and kingdom that he was bringing in was going to bring also with it new purification that we desperately need. The way that the author of Hebrews says this, in Hebrews 9, he says, but when Christ appeared as a high priest of the good things that have come, then through the greater and more perfect tent, not made with hands, that is, not of this creation, he entered once for all into the holy places, not by means of the blood of goats and calves, but by means of his own blood, thus securing eternal redemption. For if the blood of goats and bulls and the sprinkling of defiled persons with the ashes of a heifer sanctify for the purification of the flesh, how much more will the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without blemish to God, purify our conscience from dead works to serve the living God. So what we need now is not just the purification of the flesh, but what it says is you need a clean conscience. That's a different kind of purity. The word conscience in the New Testament refers to this inner awareness that evaluates whether we're guilty, clean, right, wrong, faithful, condemned. It's that inner voice inside of you. Do you guys know that voice? So the Greek word for it just speaks specifically to inward knowing or knowing oneself. There's something in us that speaks to us and reveals these imperfections. And I think what we do, and you may be like, man, I don't have a jar of purification next to my table. I don't sit there. I may wash my hands in the sink, but I'm not thinking I need to be spiritually clean through this jar. But I think what we do, if we're not careful, is we do the same thing. We try to do everything we can to present our external selves as perfectly clean, and we ignore the fact that we need a deeper kind of cleansing. And so what we offer to each other is pure, like perfectly curated images that we look the right way, we act the right way, we sound the right way, we dress the right way so that we can project to each other and to the world around us cleanliness. I'm clean, you're clean, we're all clean. We all look clean. Physically, we're all just like we're doing the right things, saying the right things. What we're doing is we're doing the same thing as where we're looking our external selves and we're saying to one another cleanliness. We do the right things and that we achieve success and we pursue our careers. We're headed in the right direction. We counsel one another and we address each other graciously, but maybe sometimes never actually addressing the issue. We're patient with each other's imperfections and lack of cleanliness. The reason is because you're unclean and I'm unclean. And so we just do that and we offer it to one another. We fail time and time again to understand that this uncleanliness, this physical uncleanliness, is something that is not saving us. And yet we do it relentlessly. We're just constantly presenting ourselves as clean. And what we see here is that what we need is a clean conscience. We need what Jesus offers is a right soul that we need to be restored and placed in us. The way that Hebrews 10:2 says how this changes us is he says, let us draw near with a true heart and full assurance of faith, with our hearts sprinkled clean from an evil conscience. Do you see that? And our bodies washed with pure water. Let us hold fast to the confession of our hope without wavering, for he who promised is faithful. So what he's saying is what this does is it cleanses us in a way where our actual hearts are made pure. And I think this is what happens to me is like, and Paul addresses this in Romans, is that we go from a place of maybe this is the first time you've ever heard that. And I think what I want you to hear is that Jesus is offering real cleansing that the world cannot offer you. It promises you that it can give you some things that make you feel clean for a moment, but it can't offer you that kind of purity. And that's what Jesus is offering to you. And then one of the other things that happens is that maybe you've accepted that and then you're convinced through shame oftentimes and deceit that you actually are unclean. And while we will participate in the world and we'll find ourselves continuing to struggle through sin, what Jesus is beckoning us back into is saying, you cannot clean yourself. It's impossible. Come to me and I will offer you cleanliness. If I can purify you, then what you will find is that you are perfectly accepted. That not because of who you are, but because what I am doing in you. That Jesus can offer real cleansing. Jesus is the new and greater cleansing that we need. The other thing that we see is that Jesus is our new and greater provision. Let's keep reading. So it says, so they took it when the master of the feast tested the water, now become wine, and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom and said to him, everyone serves the good wine first, and when people have drunk freely, then the poor wine, but you have kept the good wine until now. So D.A. Carson, when he refers to this moment, he says, a wedding celebration could last as long as a week. So different cultures have different wedding celebrations. I counted, I think we have 6 weddings within our congregation this year. It's a lot, guys. But there's some of them, you have like shorter weddings and longer weddings. In our culture, there's just like, it's not as clearly defined, but some cultures, it's just like weddings are huge. They're multi-day, 3, 4, 5 day. And that's this culture. And he says a wedding celebration could last as long as a week, and the financial responsibility lay with the groom. To run out of supplies would be a dreadful embarrassment and a shame culture. There is some evidence it could also lay the groom open to a lawsuit from relatives of the bride. Can you imagine? They're like, we came to drink wine, and it's crazy. It's just a whole different environment. And the reason because not only are there big celebrations, but it's an honor-shame culture. And so for us, when we feel shame, we feel it for a moment. But for them, this is something that would have defined them as a family. They would have been known as the family, and he would have been known as the groom, that while they invited the whole town, they were not able to provide for the celebration. And if they're not able to provide for the celebration, it's seen for him as a groom that's not able to provide for his bride. And as a groom that's not able to provide for his bride, that would be seen as the father of the bride would be seen as something that would have been seriously, almost legally offensive. So this is no small thing. And I think, man, what would it have been like to be the groom? I feel like he gets lost in all of this, the bridegroom, that he's now, I don't know if he was informed. It doesn't sound like he really was. But what he realizes is one of the moments, probably the moment in his life that would have brought him the most significant shame, because of the presence of Jesus, it brings him praise. You realize that? So he does nothing there. So he is the master of the feast, awesome name. He realizes that they're running out of wine. They go to Mary. Mary goes to Jesus, and Jesus performs this miracle. And they're now informing the groom of this. And he says, "You have saved the good wine until last." And the groom's like, "I did what?" You know, I didn't. But yet he's now being informed that, like, if Jesus had not performed the miracle that he had, it would have been something that would have cost him a whole lot. What Jesus does is that he provides for us. One of the things that's really great to think about here is John the Baptist, when he's describing Jesus in John chapter 1, he says, "I am not the Christ. I have been sent before him," when he's describing his role. But in John chapter 3, listen to the fuller description of that. He says, "You yourselves bear me witness that I said, I am not the Christ, but I have been sent before him. The one who has the bride is the bridegroom. The friend of the bridegroom, who stands and hears him, rejoices greatly at the bridegroom's voice. Therefore, this joy of mine is now complete. He must increase, and I must decrease." You know what that means? Going off of John the Baptist's words, that while this was the groom's wedding, he was not the only groom at the wedding. That Jesus is the greater bridegroom. So while he attends this wedding, in John's own description, he describes Jesus as this groom. And so while Jesus is sitting there and the groom realizes, and maybe he does, I don't know, but what we see from the story is that the groom has come to the limit of his ability to provide. Have you ever been there? Like, have you been there in your life where, I experienced that. You probably experienced that in your own life in different ways. I experienced that as a father. I experienced that as a husband. You can experience it even just as an individual, where you realize that you are at the limit of your ability to provide. No matter what else you do, you can't do anything more to bring about what's necessary. You have limitations. But what we see here is that Jesus, as the groom, does not have those limitations. That Jesus never runs out, ever. That as you go into this wedding feast, you have a groom that represents us, that has its limitations, but Jesus himself is limitless. And it kind of lands in this place where it's interesting to see how not everyone saw this miracle. I don't know how much Mary saw of it. I don't really know how much the groom saw. It's clear that the master of the feast saw, but the ones who did see were his disciples. It says at the very end, it says, "This, the first of his signs, Jesus did at Cana in Galilee and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him." I think it's beautiful that Jesus is inviting his disciples as graciously and patiently, but what he's doing is he's revealing as a sign who he is. So not everyone got to see, but Jesus shows them that he has the ability to provide in all circumstances. Not everyone got to see that, but he's showing them that he is the one that's bringing the new and the greater wine that can offer real purification for us. And it says that they responded with belief. So for you today, I guess the question is, what does that belief look like in your heart? So if I looked at your life and I asked the question, where do you believe that your provision comes from? What would I see? Like, if you were to just be honest about your life and you say, if I were to ask the question, we're talking about provision, and you were to assess your own life and you were to say, all right, where do I believe that my provision comes from? Would you say that in the moments of greatest need that you run to the groom that as always has everything that you need, that you run to Christ? Or would you say that you find yourself running to places that time and time again are reminding you that you have your limitations? Like, do you find yourself coming up empty? Do you find yourself constantly coming to a dead end? Do you find yourself at the end of yourself? Because they may be indications that you're running to places in this world that's promising provision, but that doesn't have the power to give it. And the second question, if I looked at your life and asked the question, where do you go to for a clean conscience? A lot of times, one of the things that we'll do when we feel our conscience begin to convict us is that we will honestly just distract ourselves. We're just like, man, if I could just not feel that for like 24 hours, then I can just kind of like bear down and just move on, give myself a couple of lies that are just like, hey, everyone kind of deals with this and nobody's perfect and we're just gonna move on. I think we live in that space because we've learned to live in that space. And what I'm telling you is that what if that's not where you had to live? Like, what if Jesus is offering you true, pure, cleanly, like honest, real, genuine life and eternal life in walking with him? It would look completely different. We're told that this is how we're meant to function, but Jesus offers to us something more. Where do you run when you feel as though you need to clean your conscience? As the band comes up, I just want to pray for us and give us a little bit of time and space. I know that as we look through these, the goal here as we go through these 7 different signs is that we would be given time just to respond to them. The point of the sign is that it would point you to Jesus so that you could see who he is and you could see the kingdom that he's bringing and that you could respond to that. And so I would encourage you just take a moment here and just like the disciples who are sitting here around these 20 to 30 gallon jars, do you see the miracle? Like, do you see it? You know, they've seen it, but like, do you see this real power that's displayed? Do you see the greater truth that's being offered? Do you want that in your life? Like, is that something that you deeply desire and do you have it? If you need someone to pray with you, I will be right up here. Joe will come on up here and pray with you. Brett will pray with you. We can get anybody else. We'll come and pray. But if you want to come up, we're going to give just a little bit of time and space just to pray. You personally go to the Lord. If you want someone to pray with you, you're welcome to come up here, and we would love to pray with you. I would encourage you to be honest. Just be honest with yourself about the way that you've walked with the Lord and whether or not you are really experiencing his purification and his provision in your life. Let me pray. Lord, thank you that no matter where we've come from, that you offer these truths to us, that we've seen that through the power of Jesus, that you can do miraculous things. Lord, that your spirit works powerfully through your son. And so as we look at a simple miracle of water into wine, we marvel that, Lord, you are offering greater purification. If you need to cleanse us now, Lord, would we come to you, Lord, seeking that cleansing? And Lord, would you do something that is just deeper than just our flesh and blood? Lord, would you do something that is like heart work, that's in our soul, Lord? Would you mend anything that's broken in there? And Lord, if we are at a place where, Lord, we need your provision, Lord, help us to recognize that in you, we have everything that we need. Help us to run to you, Lord, to offer up the things that we have run to before as things that are not providing what we need, but you're our provider. Lord, you are the bridegroom, the true bridegroom that never runs out, ever. Lord, that your provision is endless. So Lord, help us to trust that provision in our life. In your name, amen.